Welcome to the second of two workshops on planned giving, and we'll get into that. Looking at wills, legacy society, and the church's role in encouraging people to have a will, to make plans for the end of their life in liturgy, in communication with their family, in their finances, in their legal papers. And we'll talk a little bit about all those tonight. Next slide, please. Let us pray. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Generous and loving God, we come to you in thanksgiving, knowing that all we are and that all we have is a gift from you. We offer you thanks and praise for the beauty of the earth, our work, our family, our loved ones, and all the gifts we've been given. In faith and love, help us to do your will. We are listening. We pray that we will make stewardship a way of life. Help us plan to serve our church, our community, and our world with your gifts. May we serve you and pray with the joyful spirit of mind and heart. Amen. Okay, next slide, please. Brief overview tonight. We've got a presentation about our treasure for God's mission. And that looks at the spiritual foundations of planned giving. And that'll be by Mother Megan. Planned giving highlights from different churches. We have a couple of presenters tonight, and then we'll have a panel discussion with those presenters after they give a little piece of background highlights on what they've been doing at their church, what they're finding, what's worked, what they've struggled with, how they overcame it. And that will flow into a panel discussion. And from there, we'll look at wrapping up and what next steps, what you heard tonight, what questions you brought, what you learned, what did this stir up in you that you want to take this forward? You know, one specific thing you can do going out from here. Always a takeaway project resource. We always look for a takeaway for you. Next slide, please.
All right. Thank you, Father Bob.
Hi, Megan.
Hello there. I'm Megan Thomas. I'm a retired priest in the Diocese of New Jersey and practicing attorney, specializing in estate planning, estate administration, and the nonprofit field. We here at Project Resource in the Diocese of New Jersey are your stewardship commission. And our goal is to help you amp up your stewardship by annual giving, major gifts, and planned giving, which is the subject of tonight's workshop. You know, we plan for all sorts of things in life. We plan for the purchase of a home, for educating our children. We plan for our retirements. So planning is an essential part of who we are. Planning ahead is part of stewardship. It's not only financial, but it's also how we plan for our families. And this evening, our focus is going to be particularly on this question: how do we use our resources for God's mission? Next slide, please. Now, some people find it peculiar that the Bible would have anything to say about planned giving, but you know, Jesus actually spoke quite a bit about wealth, and he even spoke about family inheritance and how we use our resources. Next slide. In this passage might be familiar to you. It's from the Sermon on the Mount. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and decay destroys and where thieves break in and steal, but store up treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor decay destroy, nor thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there also your heart will be. But you might actually know the more expanded version, which comes from the Gospel of Luke, and is the reason why you have a picture of a barn and a silo here. This is from Luke's Gospel. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. And then Jesus goes on to say, provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Next slide. The church also has something to say about planned giving, and I think this actually surprises most people. Next slide. On this slide, we see the rubric. Rubric is a fancy word for instructions that appears at the end of the liturgy for the Thanksgiving for a Child, a liturgy rarely used by most of us. And so I think that's the reason why we don't bump into this passage, but here's what it says. The minister of the congregation is directed to instruct the people from time to time about the duty of Christian parents to make prudent provision for the well-being of their families, and of all persons to make wills while they are in health, arranging for the disposal of their temporal goods, not neglecting, if they are able, to leave bequests for religious and charitable uses. Next slide. So what then is a planned gift? Well, typically a planned gift is one that matures, as we say, upon the donor's death. And so often it's a bequest in a will, or a distribution from a revocable trust, or a payment from a life insurance policy, or a distribution from retirement assets. And planning is required to make any one of these gifts. And so we think carefully about what it will take to make this kind of provision, not only for the well-being of our families, of course, but also to provide for God's mission, and so that we can carry out the ministry that's been entrusted to us as followers of Jesus. Let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to touch on some nuts and bolts this evening. We can't get into too much detail, but we can take a quick peek at the sorts of planned gifts that are possible, knowing that some of these might not be easy for all people, and some of them are particularly complicated. But in addition to bequests, which I referred to a moment ago, which are gifts that are fulfilled upon the death of the donor, there are gifts that benefit a donor or others during the donor's lifetime. And so I have here some simple forms and some more complicated ones. An easy form is a charitable gift annuity, which is a contract. It's an annuity that pays an annuity to you for life and then leaves the residuum, what's left over, to the church. These are administered through the Episcopal Church Foundation. Pooled income funds work similarly. And then there are complicated ones that require an attorney, like preparing a trust agreement that divides an interest in property between charity and individuals. And then there are lifetime gifts that require a little bit of planning, and certainly gifts of appreciated stocks are a planned gift. We found out at last week's presentation that there are some congregations in the midst of capital campaigns who really need current assets. They need distributions and gifts from their members currently, in order to have the resources available to make the improvements they intend to make. And one of the things that one of those congregations had done was to promote the IRA rollover distribution. So I just describe this very briefly because it's not available really to everybody, but for someone who is age 70 and 1/2 or older, who is receiving large payments from their IRA and doesn't need all the income, one thing you can do with the excess income, instead of receiving it and being taxed on it, is to transfer up to $100,000 a year to charitable purposes. And this is done through the financial institution where your IRA is held. And if you need to know more about that, just leave us a note in the chat and there will be resources available for you to check out after this program. Of course, there are opportunities to give more complicated assets like art and real estate, cars, boats, and so on. But that's really not the topic for tonight. Next slide, please. Planned giving, gifts that mature, especially upon death, are really made in confidence and in hope. And what's remarkable about them in many ways is that the donor has elevated the church to the level of family. So the donor who might have made a gift to, say, a godchild or a niece or nephew, also makes a gift to the church. So the church is part of that donor's set of beneficiaries. Like a family member, someone who will remember you and benefit from the resources that you can leave them. And so in many ways, cultivating planned gifts is a ministry of pastoral care. And this is something that clergy especially should be aware of, because we ought not to be afraid to speak about the end of life. Next slide, please. So sometimes people say to me, well, I don't even have an estate. Well, frankly, just about everybody does have an estate. If you have a car, or if you have a bank account in your sole name, even if you receive an insurance refund or an income tax refund after your death, you will have an estate. So do you need an estate plan? Well, I tell people yes, absolutely, because if you don't make provision for what to do with the resources that you own at the time of death, the state of New Jersey has an estate plan for you, and you might not like what it says. And this is true of every state. I was told that we might have attendees from outside New Jersey. Every state has a way to distribute assets of someone who dies without a will. Next slide. And so we ought to have essential documents. And that would include a last will and testament, and possibly a revocable trust, sometimes called a living trust. Revocable trusts are common estate planning vehicle in some states, less so in New Jersey, where there isn't as much benefit to having a revocable trust, because probate in New Jersey is fairly simple compared to some other jurisdictions. People should have a durable power of attorney that appoints someone to help you with your financial affairs if you reach the point in life where you're too ill or too frail to manage your own finances. And everyone, no matter how old, should have a healthcare directive, healthcare power of attorney, appointing someone to make important medical decisions for you when you cannot communicate those decisions for yourself. And sometimes I remind people that Karen Ann Quinlan, which is the sort of landmark case in New Jersey, was a young woman when she became unconscious and was in a coma, and had no healthcare power of attorney because that was not part of the law at the time. So a healthcare directive and power of attorney is an essential document. Next slide, please. Now, I just thought I'd give you a quick overview of death taxes, at least in New Jersey. The current federal estate tax exemption is $12,920,000 per person, or close to $24 million per married couple. And for most of us, we don't have to worry about the federal estate tax because our estates are not going to be so large that they exceed this exemption. Now, over the years, this exemption has changed. Long time ago, it was only $600,000. Congress changes the law from time to time. But right now, for most people in our congregations, the federal estate tax is not a concern. Nevertheless, the tax law does permit a deduction, complete deduction for property transferred to your spouse and for property transferred for charitable purposes to charitable organizations. And then there are some provisions in the tax code that allow you to use the exemption in various ways, which we really do not have to go into this evening. New Jersey does not have an estate tax. Next slide. However, New Jersey does have a transfer inheritance tax, and this is a tax imposed on the value of property transferred at death or within a few years of death, in contemplation of death, to certain classes of beneficiaries. So, for example, if you were to leave a bequest for a sibling, a niece or a nephew, a cousin, that transfer would be taxed under New Jersey law. Very often the tax is paid out of your state if you have a will that directs that. Otherwise, it gets withheld from the distribution to your beneficiary. However, your spouse, your lineal ancestors, that would be your parents, your lineal descendants are all exempt. And of course, charitable organizations are exempt as well. So it's something to be aware of, but I do tell people, do not let taxes be the tail that wags the dog. If you wish to make a distribution or a gift to a godchild, definitely do that. Next slide. So, planning ahead. Planning ahead is a part of stewardship. And we ask, is God's will reflected in your will? We have a little postcard we hand out at my former church, and it says on it, the spirit was willing, but where was the will? That's the card that goes to our Legacy Society members and those who are interested, and we just kind of promote that as an invitation to talk about planning. You know, God's will for us includes the care for our loved ones. And when we don't make a will and we don't have the appropriate documents in place, we leave our families in the lurch. We put them in a very difficult situation where they have to act in an emergency, or if there's no will, they have to post a bond to administer your estate. They have to sometimes put money into the surrogate's court for minor children. Having a will or an appropriate estate plan is absolutely essential. And this is how we care for our families. But God's will for us also includes how we use our treasure. You know, as Christians, as disciples of Jesus, a resurrected Savior, we can talk about death. We ought not to be afraid to talk about end-of-life planning and how we ease the burden on our families. And at the same time, reflect God's will for us and our desire to serve God through the mission and the ministry entrusted to us with our financial resources, our treasure for God's mission. Next slide. I just love this cartoon. I know that my life doesn't consist in the abundance of my possessions, says one sheep. The other sheep says, that's good. But the first sheep says, but they sure make it more enjoyable. Yes, that's true. On the other hand, what we have and all we are comes from God, and we return to God those things with which we have been blessed. Next slide. So how do we start a planned giving program? Well, it's essential to build trust. You have to build trust with your congregation, because what's happening is that your members who have stewarded their personal resources during their lifetime are passing off a gift to the congregation as a steward for God's purposes. So it's a steward to steward transfer. Of course, to be effective, a planned giving program has to have a team. This is not a job that can be left to one person. Build a team and encourage vestry and other leaders in the church to be among the first to make a provision for your congregation as part of their estate plan, because after all, leaders lead. And not to be shy about sharing the fact that they've done that, if they can bring themselves to it. After all, every other organization we're involved with in life, the hospital, the ambulance corps, the animal shelter, they're not shy about sending us newsletters with nice pictures and little biographies of people who have remembered that organization as part of their estate plan. We should not be shy either. And we do encourage you to begin with bequests. Although there are many sophisticated ways to make a planned gift, including that IRA charitable rollover I spoke about a few minutes ago, 85% of all planned gifts are simple bequests, a gift made from a will or from a revocable trust, or the near equivalent, which is a gift out of your retirement plan or from a life insurance policy. That's the starting point. That's understandable to people. And sometimes it's the biggest gift that a person can make. In a sense, it can fund their annual pledge. Next slide. So at this point, we turn over the conversation to congregations in our diocese who are in the midst of planned giving. Tina, I think you are doing the introduction.
Yes, I am. I'm
All
Tina Aiken from St. David's in Cranberry. I chair the finance committee and am past stewardship chair there. And in a minute, I'll touch on a little bit of the history and going forward plans for the endowment and the Legacy Society at St. David's. But I'd like to start by introducing Patty Thompson, a member of St. David's, along with her husband, David. And Patty is the most welcoming person. When somebody walks in the door, she immediately engages with them, and I think they feel at home. David has been on the vestry at St. David's and also co-chairs finance with me. So I asked her to say a few words about why she and David decided to include the church in their estate plan. So Patty, you're up. Let's see if you're muted.
Okay. I can't see myself, so can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay. We have been members of St. David's since February of 2000. Oops. Oh, my picture's not on. I don't know why it's not showing me. Well, I don't know why you can't see me, but you can hear me, right?
We can.
I don't. Okay. So we've been members of the church since February of 2000. But I think importantly, both of us attended undergraduate institutions that from the moment we graduated started reminding us about planned giving. So this concept of bequests and leaving some of your estate to an organization was not at all new to us. And I think over the time that we've been with St. David's, we clearly have come to the conclusion it's a very, very important organization to us, much more, honestly, more so than our undergraduate institutions. We've been with the church for 20 years. We have treasures to share. It's an organization and a place that I would like to see continue to flourish. I don't know that we'll be in Cranberry for the long term of my entire life, but I would like to know that I've always left something behind at St. David's. So when we did some very active estate planning about 10, 12 years ago, it was an automatic that we would include St. David's as part of an institution that we would leave money to. Additionally, my husband has continued to work on the endowment committee, and we are involved in all the daily activities, but we understand that simply annual pledging isn't enough, and we would like to be sort of the leaders, if you will, of making sure that people understand that the long-term health of the church will be through this sort of bequests and estate planning. I guess we have gifts to share, and we care about the church. That's really what the message is.
You know, when a couple of years ago, I guess 5 years ago at this point, but when the previous rector, Karen Mitchell, and I decided we would talk with a couple of people, long-time members of St. David's, to ask whether they would consider a conversation about including the church in their estate plans. And I asked you and David, and you said, we already have. So that was a good start. And it's always nice to have a good start. It makes subsequent conversations easier. And you know, I think you shared at that time, you know, just your experience at the church and what that has meant to you. Would you say you consider it your kind of your faith family? Do you know, is it sort of, we talked about elevating, Mother Megan just mentioned elevating the church to the level of family. Is there a sense in which you think of it as your you know, your faith family?
I do, because again, I think what I really want to drive home here is that since the day I graduated from college in 77 and my husband's 79, we have been inundated with information about leaving bequests. This was not new news to us. We are very well informed about it. So when we decided to make St. David, is because we feel that is the most important place for us to leave a gift to. And we understand the reasons why people do that. And our commitment to the church, we want it to be for the long term. And thus that became it's part of our family. I guess that's a good way to put it.
Well, maybe we can go on to the next slide. And Patty, you know, feel free to. I know you have to jump off this Zoom in the not too distant future, right. But feel free as we're looking at this slide to also make any additional comments that you would like.
Tina, if I could interject for just a second, I'm sorry,
sure.
To interrupt, but there was a really great question that popped up in the chat. That, you know, might be great for people to hear also before Patty has to go. Mm-hmm. Just digging a little bit deeper, Patty, if to whatever extent you're comfortable, talking about what exactly was it that triggered this feeling in you that St. David's was an automatic, you know, like when you went to do your estate planning, you said it was just automatic that we would include St. David's. What was behind that as far as your, you know, sort of experience goes with St. David's?
Oh, well, again, I go back to why do universities call you? Because they make this case that your university is a really important part of who you are and what you are becoming and what you will be. From the time I was raised Catholic, I became an Episcopalian 20 years ago when I joined St. David's. It was sort of random, but I fell in love with the church within months of joining it. And I just feel that St. David's is a very important part of what we do in my family every year, every week when I go to church. I just feel such a loyalty and a commitment. And I believe that I'm a better person because I'm a really good Episcopalian and I want to give back to my church. And I very much applaud the efforts that our church makes from its outreach. And I think what they're doing is the right thing. It gives me great pleasure when we have new people coming in. And I want to see the church continue to thrive in our town and in our community. And I just also feel that God gave me some gifts that I can share back for the church to continue to do its good will.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Tina?
So in 2013, the vestry passed a resolution establishing an endowment. And it's 10 years ago, sort of interesting when I talked with people, well, how did that happen? What prompted setting up an endowment? Because there was a bequest that was made then shortly after that, the next year. I think actually the two went together, but it was kind of funny. Your memory gets a little bit fuzzy about the sequence of things. So I think this is an ad for write everything down, like keep a good record. I think we had probably been notified that a bequest was coming to St. David's, maybe not the exact nature of it or even the amount of it, but that it was substantial enough. The vestry decided to set up an endowment so that there would be a place for the bequest to go that would make sense. Now, part of the bequest was used to establish the endowment, and part of the bequest was used because we had a large mortgage. We had just expanded the church, added the fellowship hall, and so part of it was to pay down the mortgage, to start paying down the mortgage earlier than we had expected we could do. But that was the beginning of it. And of course, some churches are fortunate; they have endowments that have been in place for a long time. Decades, maybe even a century. Others don't have an endowment, but I think it's very critical, really, to the future to have that kind of foundation to call upon as things go up and down, as we can see in these times, how volatile the economic picture can look. So endowment got set up, it was funded, and others started making cash gifts to it. It grew over a couple of years to 50,000. And then in 2018, when it was the 50th anniversary of St. David's, that's when we thought, well, maybe it's a good time to have some conversations with some longtime members of the church to inquire to whether they might think about including St. David's through a bequest. And as I say, the conversation with Patty and David was pretty short because they had already done that. They had already had a plan in place. And there were several others who at the time said, oh, yeah, I think about that. Well, let me think about how I should do that. Could I gift my, pension plan? What are the different ways I might make that happen? And then some of the people who said, yep, I'm going to include the St. David's in my bequest, also started making cash gifts to the endowment. And now we're over 100,000, I think 119 now. It's more a year ago than it is now, but still there's been very nice growth there. So that was a little of the history. And then the pandemic came and things kind of ground to a halt, I would say. There were other more pressing concerns in terms of going forward. And so just recently I spoke with Mother Amy and said, what are your thoughts on this? And she said, oh, I would love to preach about plan giving. Mother Megan gave us some of the scriptural foundation there, and Mother Amy at St. David's said, yes, let's do that during Pentecost. Let's plan for it sometime in that stretch. And she said, oh, and by the way, I've started encouraging members to come in and talk with me about their funeral plans. What readings do they want? What hymns do they want? What rite do they want? Rite 1, rite 2. And she said, well, I could talk with them. It would just be a natural thing as part of that conversation to talk with them about a gift to St. David's, if that's something they would like to consider. So that's some of the steps we've planned to take. And I think the main thing is to be a little bit more intentional and regular about just putting the information out there for people, so that it's not where we call some attention to it, spotlight it during Pentecost, and then just make the information available on a regular basis through the newsletter, through some conversations from the pulpit, from Mother Amy from time to time, and take that forward. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Sorry. The what you see here was a leave behind, when in this case it was our former rector, Mother Karen, and I met with some people. The conversation was really the kind that that Patty just mentioned. Tell us your story. Tell us about your time at St. David's. Tell us about your family's time there. But to leave something, somebody said, well, I'm interested, but gosh, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that. When we wanted something, I'm sorry, my voice is just going here. Let me get a sip. We wanted something that would prompt thinking. So this very brief handout covers some of the things in a very simple way that Mother Megan was able to give us more detail on. But we thought was probably a good thing to leave with people so they could look at it and think, oh, well, there are various ways to do it. It doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be a bequest. It could be something else like a gift of an insurance policy or retirement account. It could be, pooled income fund, so that it would simply prompt thinking. It would make the point of why it's important to the future of the church. And it would also offer the thought that a bequest, a planned gift, might give the opportunity to make a more substantial gift, to round out a lifetime of giving. Perhaps during their lifetime, they thought, I'd like to do more, but I can't. But my children are pretty well taken care of. I think I can do more. Or I always wanted to tithe and I really tried, but I couldn't quite get there. But maybe I could leave 10% of my estate to the church. So, there's different ways that one might communicate this information, but for us, this worked as just a simple leave behind. So that's it for St. David's.
So I'd like to introduce to you Lou Price from Church of the Advent in Cape May. I had the privilege, well, I guess it's a little more than a year ago, of going down to Cape May to give a presentation for an adult forum that they were having on a series of sort of planning, being wise about your financial and personal life. And Lou can describe that in more detail. Lou, you're with us, right? Go right ahead.
I am.
Hi.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to participate. I would say Church of the Advent in Cape May, we're reinvigorating our endowment. We're a small, about 119 active members in the parish report that we just sent in. We're an historic church right in the center of historic Cape May. And our parishioners are aging. Our newer parishioners tend to be baby boomers who can afford to come into Cape May. Unfortunately, the real estate keeps going up and up for people. So 71% of our parishioners are seniors. Makes it kind of a challenging way to grow the church. Our planned giving for the church over the years has tended to be for specific projects, usually to upgrade the physical plant. Or we have a number of people over the years who gave to scholarship programs, and some of them were kind of specific scholarships. And we do a really nice job in outreach. And so we have folks who have given money for outreach programs, and we have a very active outreach committee that manages those funds. But anyway, we just in the last year and a half started to take another look and said, we have a lot of these, what I call restricted funds for specific purposes, but we really need to focus on our endowment fund, which is really there for the mission and ministry of the church as needed as the church goes on and plans for the future. And at that point, this was about back when Reverend Thomas came and met with us. Our fund was about $130,000. It's since declined because 2002 was an awful year, we all know, in the equity and bond markets. So it's a little bit of a lesson that, you really got to look for the long term with these kinds of things. They will grow, but you can have years that aren't so exciting. So we said that we needed to really work on the endowment fund. We unfortunately need to take about 5% of it in recent years to help support our operating budget to make ends meet. We do not have growing numbers of pledge units because of what I had said earlier in terms of the membership of the church. But we had two objectives that we were focused on. One is to start to pay attention to the endowment fund and, raise the awareness of what it is, just to find out, what it is, how big it is, because no one had really paid attention to it for some time, unfortunately. And also to grow the size of the fund by, starting to educate the parish on the spiritual aspects of planned giving and practical ways to give, which were mentioned earlier. So we kind of took the following steps over the last year plus. We formed an endowment committee. It's really a subcommittee of our finance committee. We adopted an endowment policy, which kind of formally set up the endowment fund, and we based it on one that I had used at a church, or I had been involved in one down in Kensington, Maryland, where I lived for most of my life. I've been an Episcopalian since, I guess, 1971. Anyway, the main components of that endowment policy is really establishing the fund, specifying the responsibilities of the vestry, establishing gift policies, establishing investment policies, and spending policies. What are you going to use the fund for? And the responsibilities of the committee, and basically fundamental investment principles and how you go about making distributions, from the fund. And we also adopted a gift acceptance policy. And, at first, some people said, well, what do you need that for? Well, we felt it was important to have some discipline in receiving gifts, because we really want gifts that support the mission and ministry of the church, and to try to encourage people to give unrestricted gifts as opposed to gifts for very specific things. Because I think probably a lot of us in churches, we have all these funds, and they just sit there, for specific things. So anyway, so the gift acceptance policy were really, it gave us a procedure for accepting gifts that were not directly to the endowment fund, gifts that go directly to the endowment fund, when we would use legal counsel, and then restrictions on gifts. I mean, you don't want to take gifts that are going to somehow negatively influence the reputation of the church, or sometimes gifts can cost the church money, especially like, complex real estate or something like that. And then also we talked in there about valuation of gifts, that really the responsibility is on the giver, and so that the church doesn't take on risk of valuation where, look, we don't really have the capability within the church, and we don't want to get into what's the value of something for somebody's taxes. So the other thing we started to do was start to track the endowment fund's performance. And like I said, it's not been exciting over the last year, starting to tick up again. And then we started educating the parishioners. More importantly, we did newsletter articles through our monthly newsletter. We did add an endowment page to the church website. And if you're interested, it's just Cape May Advent, ADVENT.org. And, and you could read what we put on there. We also made brochures that we got from the Episcopal Church Foundation available to parishioners. And we've really focused on, like we said earlier, on wills, the simple form, because that's what most people are interested in doing. And we do have 9 parishioners who've mentioned the church in their wills, and our goal is, in another year we can say maybe 12 or something. That's really what we're trying to do. And we did things like invited Reverend Thomas down, to present to our adult forum. We started reporting to the congregation on the fund at our annual parish meeting, just at our last meeting. Going forward, our focus in June, we're going to have our first legacy luncheon, at least the first one in recent years, first one I'm aware of that's been done there, to recognize the parishioners who want to be recognized, who have mentioned the church in their wills, but also, as kind of a way to just improve the awareness of the endowment fund amongst the parishioners in the church. And then the other thing we're just starting to do is to start to review our investments and the performance of them, and decide how we have the money invested is really, whether it's the right thing for us to do. And I think it is. I mean, we have the bulk of it in the Diocesan Investment Trust, and but we do have some in bonds too, and that kind of spreads out the risk between equities and the bonds, which maybe help to smooth out the ups and downs. And so anyway, our work, like I've inferred here, has not really resulted in a growth yet. But what we hope is that by taking steps, what we're really trying to do is, I think the word trust was used earlier, and that is we want to be able to communicate to the congregation and give them, the feeling that if they, choose to give to Advent as a gift to God, that money that they give, which was hard earned over their lifetime, will be well managed and will be put to good use for the ministry and mission of the Church of the Advent. Because I think, personally, I think that's probably the most important thing we do right now, is build up that trust and awareness so that people will think about us, when they feel, the desire to mention us in their will. So that's kind of what we're up to.
Thanks so much, Lou. That's great.
Okay, having heard that, thank you to Tina and Lou. Are we doing Shirley? Or
No.
this is reference to Shirley's presentation last week, is that right?
Yes,
So,
I'm just on the panel.
Thank you, Shirley. So our panel is Tina, who you heard from St. David's Cranberry, Lou from Cape May Advent, and Shirley, who presented on St. Augustine's Asbury Park last week. So you can decide who wants to go first, but can you start at the beginning? And each of you touched on this a little bit, but what was your first step? Or what was the first obstacle you had to overcome to go from thinking about it to doing something about it? Lou.
Yeah, I'll give it a try. I mean, let's see, I was on the vestry at that time and on the finance committee. And what I think happened is we had a little bit of an issue with one of our funds, and a donor wanting to have a lot of control over the money donated. And so it made for, some challenges within the parish. And I think that, I think that had a little bit to do with what we were saying, is that we need to be thinking again about unrestricted gifts to the church. And, gifts to God, gifts for the ministry and mission of the church. And so that plus just, I think, a new rector, came in and a new person in the place and said, hey, maybe we need to start focusing more on our what I'd call the unrestricted endowment, for the overall ministry and mission of the church. And so that kind of got us started. And then the very first thing we did was to form a policy. And so rather than write anything from scratch, I always learn, go find out what's out there and get a good example and modify it. And that's what we did. And then the vestry talked about it and approved it, and off we went. I mean, that set up the endowment and the members and the policies and that kind of thing. And so now it's a matter of keeping it going. And so that just takes, the ongoing prodding, and
Sure.
hit ourselves over the head. We got to go out and say something about this again, get those flyers out, whatever.
Yeah. Shirley, what was the starting point at St. Augustine's?
Well, I think the starting point was on stewardship committee. We had a number of different discussions from attending a project resource discussion, I guess.
Oh, I hear they're good.
They are wonderful, and guess what? I have an inside story because I'm on that. But anyway, we were very interested in this topic of planned giving, and thought that maybe we need to start our journey and start our conversation with our church family. So in the fall last year, we did have a workshop of various different topics. One of them was planned giving. And one of our expert members from Project Resource started that conversation with our members that attended the workshop in the fall. So we have a ways to go, but we had that first beginning discussion with our church family. We do have a ways to go. We want to continue that discussion. We're learning a lot tonight, so that we can begin to break this topic down in smaller bits and pieces. But there's so many easy steps to take now to begin that next step. But our first step was really discussing it in stewardship, and then having that workshop in the fall, where one of the topics was planned giving, along with a series of other topics.
Okay. And this next question is for all three of you. And because you're in a church that has made a start, I want to ask you, what's one thing you wish you knew when you did start? Is there something that you learned along the way that you really didn't see coming, good or bad?
Oh, okay, didn't see coming. We probably should have started earlier. It wasn't as
Wish you'd
difficult
started
now
sooner.
as, yeah, it wasn't, it doesn't appear to be, the topic was kind of overwhelming, and it's not. And you just need to address it spiritually. And there it is.
That's a pretty good thing. I wish I knew it wasn't the boogeyman I thought it was.
Right.
Good for you. And I see Lou nodding to that too.
Yeah.
That starting
I mean,
is its own reward.
Yeah, I think maybe looking back on it, it would be to do what I think was mentioned earlier, is to find someone who has made that decision, who's willing to talk about it. I think
Yes.
might be a good way to start. By standing up at Sunday service and here's why I made a decision to mention Church of the Advent in my will. Might have been a good thing to do. And it doesn't mean we can't do it now,
Did you do it and wish you had done it sooner? Or do you think that that's just something that helps move it from the abstract to the personal?
Yes, I think the latter. I
Okay.
think that's really important. And we worked, I sound a little businesslike because that's my background, but we did do a lot of personal things. I mean, our articles were much more spiritual and personal, and but it's got to be personal, and it's got to be soft. It's got to be, why do people want to do it? That's what it's all about.
Thank you. Tina, is there anything about this that you wish you knew when you started, or you think your team members wish they knew when they started?
Well, I think we were just, it wasn't, it was a conscious decision to set up the endowment, but in a way, here came notification that we were going to receive a large bequest, relatively large, right? And so simply people had to jump in and address that, and we did much as Lou just said. The first thing was the resolution and the points that Lou just outlined there in terms of what the resolution covers. Ours does as well, and I think that was really important that it gets set up well to start with. How do decisions get made? How do investments get made? What kind of gifts can you accept? I think that's just critical. That did come along. I suspect actually a large part of that is due to Patty Thompson's husband, David, who chairs the endowment committee. And I had asked him to be on tonight as well, but he's traveling for work and couldn't. So I think that we simply, not that we were lucky, but we got a good start.
Okay. Hey, this is not the first time that having a gift acceptance policy has come up in the conversation. I saw a question in the chat. I'm having trouble reading the chat and following the conversation, but I think at least one person said, would it be possible to share sample gift acceptance policies when we share the slides and the notes from tonight? For those of you who have one, whether you're a presenter tonight or not, would you be willing to do that? And we'll make it part of our distribution.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that wasn't just the gift acceptance policies, that was all of the policies, really. So
All the policies.
yeah, that
Okay,
would be
good.
really helpful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
And maybe there are things that could be improved in them, it's.
Yeah.
No, but what's there now, it will reflect what you've learned so far, and people will adapt theirs. So yeah, we'll try and find a way to get that from you to us, and put it out with the package. Jonathan is saying that he sees the Cape May Advent has the policy on their website. So that's only
right.
getting
I
easier.
forgot
Yay.
that. Yeah,
Yay, you.
And why we did that was, once again, it's just, I think Tanya was just making this point, or Tina, I guess Tina. You got to give people confidence that it's being managed well and that there's a process, because, otherwise, I don't know how many people would want to give the church, $50,000 if they think it's just going to be frittered away for, somebody's personal, interest.
Yep.
If you know what I'm saying.
Confidence builder.
it's got to be a confidence builder, and it's more than developing it. You have to like remind people that you have it, and the next thing, is a challenge is you got to follow it. You got to get your committee, and you got to be disciplined, which we're just starting to work on that, quite frankly. I mean, because we did this right in the middle of COVID, and we all know what that's been like.
Yep. So thank you for that. Can
I-
you talk a
could I
little
add-
bit about?
Sorry, could I
I'm
add?
sorry, go ahead.
Just one thing, and I imagine that you're doing this as well, Lou, but it's important as part of the annual report to report on the endowment in that
Yes.
format.
It is, and we kind of jammed that in this year, but we need to be more, a little bit more diligent about that too, because that is very important. And the other thing, another thing that just came to mind is we've had discussions as a parish. I know when I first started going there about using endowment money for operating expenses, and that's an interesting discussion, because an endowment is something that you generally want to grow over time and then use it for kind of big things, to, maybe put an addition on, or, some kind of big program, or some kind of disaster that might happen, or some kind of new ministry that you want the church to get into. But unfortunately, we're struggling with our operating budget, which I'm sure we're not the only ones, and making ends meet. And so we can spend in our policy up to 5% of our average value of the fund over the last 12 calendar quarters is the way we defined it. And so unless the vestry makes a decision that, because of a catastrophe, you need to use more. But that's kind of an important part too. It can be a balance, and it can be a give take.
Thank
And
you.
I think it's also important to note along with that, that one of the things that gives people that confidence and that trust when you do something like that is that 5% guideline, that rule of thumb, is used by the IRS for private foundations, specifically as as that guideline as to, what you can expect to spend on an annual basis and still continue to maintain the purchasing power, i.e. grow, your endowment. So there again, you're using sort of that objective third-party standard for determining how much you're going to spend, which also helps to give people, additional confidence in how you're managing the fund.
And our goal is to not use any of it, but we're not there.
I want to turn the discussion back to the people who are here tonight, listening to those of you who have made your start in this, and maybe trying to picture themselves beginning this in their parish. And by the end of the night, we'll probably ask everybody, what's one thing you want to take away or try when you get home, or one person to talk to, even if you don't have a team yet. So I want to ask the people who've started this, our panelists, Tina and Lou and Shirley, what was the point where you went from a small working group, one or two people imagining this, maybe you talk to the rector, maybe you talk to the warden, maybe you are the warden, you go from a handful of people to the step into the congregation? How did you first raise it with the congregation? How did you go widen the circle beyond that initial core group who could see a little further ahead, maybe, to make it a wider conversation?
Yeah.
What was one thing you did? What was one moment for you?
Well, I could say what we did. I mean, we started really with the finance committee, the decision to do this, and then taking it to the vestry, and then having a wider conversation with the vestry over 2 or 3 meetings, parts of the vestry meetings.
And clearly a process, several steps just to get to vestry.
Just to get to the vestry, and then by doing the policy, then they formally adopted the policy, And
Okay.
once we had that, we said, okay, well, we need now to start figuring out how are we going to communicate this to the congregation. And so we started with the newsletter articles. And then we started adding in newsletter articles, we would make references to the Episcopal Church Foundation, and we started putting just a couple simple brochures. We focused on the one on wills, and the one which sort of gave other kinds of ways to give, in plan giving, but really focused on the will one because we thought that's the one that people would be most interested in. And then we would make announcements that those brochures were available. And then we put it on the website. And now we're doing the legacy. Then we did the annual meeting, with a short presentation, and then now we're doing the legacy. And we haven't planned the legacy yet, other than the date. But I think if we do it right, that could be a really important part of awareness in the congregation, is to make the legacy luncheon that we're going to do a kind of an awareness.
Okay. Shirley or Tina, what was the process like for you going from a couple of people talking about this to widening the circle, building partnership and engagement?
Well, for us, as I stated earlier, we had a conversation again at Stewardship Committee, but prior to that, we spoke with project resource experts on how to potentially begin the discussion. So that was what we did. We have a long ways to go, but some very, very good ideas from this conversation tonight. But it went from a smaller group with project resource, then to in the Stewardship Committee, and then of course branching out just to begin to get our feet wet, put our toe in the water at that workshop that we had in the fall. And next, now we have to build on that. I have some great ideas, so we'll bring it back to Stewardship Committee and the vestry to begin some of those very, very specific steps that I've learned tonight, such as a brochure, documents, policies, procedures, all those things.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shirley. Tina?
I would say for us, the initial phase looked very much like what Lou described in terms of the conversations with the finance committee, with the vestry. And then because it was our 50th anniversary back in 2018, that was really what prompted saying, looking back, looking forward. So where St. David's had been the first 50 years, and then envisioning where St. David's would like to be in the next 50 years. And that very naturally led itself into talking with a few people at the start, not really making it kind of so visible congregation wide until we had a few initial conversations to see what the response was and how people felt about that. And so that's when it started to broaden and take off a little bit.
Thank you, Tina. In just a minute or two, we're going to go to question and answers with everybody who's gathered. But before we do, I have one last question for our panelists. We'll call this the lightning round. As you saw this go from a few people through the process and to make its way into the congregation and start to take hold, how did it feel?
Great.
I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
I mean, we're still in the lighting the ignition phase.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're there. Sorry, go ahead, Lou.
No, I'm just going to say, just listening to you talk about the envisioning where you want to see the church in the future. That's something we have not done. And I'm thinking, is that something we can do where 75% or 71% of our parishioners are, like my age and older. And so, that's an interesting thing. And it's an interesting question, but it's very important. And I
It
think
is.
that would help us.
So it's bringing you into deep questions
Yeah.
Yes.
that deserve to be addressed. Okay. All right. Thank you to Shirley and Tina and Lou as our panelists tonight. I found it helpful and interesting. I hope everybody else did too. We're going to go from here into, here we are, wrap up and next steps. And I feel like when the team was preparing for this the other night, I said, it feels like this is the part of the baptism ceremony where we've done the vows, and then as the priest, I turn to the whole congregation and I say, how will all of you who have heard these things do all in your power to help this person grow in their life in Christ? How will you go forward from here? And the request this evening to give the conversation some shape is, we're asking you in the chat, please share one next step that you could take to activate your church's planned giving journey. Or what's one idea that you take away from tonight's session that could be a seed corn for you and possibly someday for others? So in the chat, if you would, you don't have to answer both of them, but either one of those about what's your takeaway. We'll give it just a couple of minutes, and then we'll go through some of them. I'm starting to see a few initial responses. We'll just give it another minute or so. And we will find ways to include these chat statements from you along with the slides when we give them out. So you'll have notes on what you said, as well as some potential starting points that other people are looking at. I'm going to start taking these. I'm not sure what order I'm going to take them in, but I see from Martha, a gift acceptance policy. Martha, are you on? I can't see everybody's face the way the screen is set up right now. Maybe could we go to an array of everybody's face? I'm not sure who's driving. Is Rebecca driving? There we go. Thank you. And I'm going to shift my view to gallery. Thank you. Up in the top right, I clicked view and chose gallery so I can see everybody. Martha.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Martha. So gift acceptance policy is on your list, on your wish list to get started. And you said thinking of foundations. What kind of foundations? What do you have in mind when you say foundations?
Well, we have a beginning of one as an endowment, which we kind of put off to the side and don't talk about again. And every time an amount of money comes in, we decide on which part of the building needs some attention next. And I think an acceptance policy could say, set aside 10%, set aside 20% of undesignated funds, foundation wise, and use the rest towards current policies. But to keep that in mind, rather than putting out the fires.
So that would give some shape to it, but also some oomph, and not just reacting to the next time money comes in and there's a problem waiting for it.
Right, thinking
Great,
more into
thank
the
you.
future.
Yeah, more to the future. Thank you. I see Mary Elise is also thinking about getting some sample gift acceptance policies. It sounds like we'll already be able to do that coming out of tonight, thanks to those who are already here. And Lou echoed something that I heard you say. Have a visioning conversation. Where do you want to be 5 or 10 years out? There is no demographic that couldn't look to the future. So thank you for that, Lou. And I see Michael Way. I love this. Is Michael here? Where's Michael? Just start. What, don't delay because it seems overwhelming. And we talked about this before. I think Tina talked about just do it and take away some of the, maybe it was Shirley, I'm sorry. Doing it and putting yourself in it takes away some of the boogeyman factor. It makes
Just
it less.
Remember Nike. Just do it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
What would just doing it look like in your parish? Who would you talk to? What group would you gather? What would you use to do that? But this idea of just start, I think is brilliant. And so thank you for that, Michael. And I'm scrolling down. I see Jonathan Gloucester, I'm sorry. Christ Church, New Brunswick. We have an endowment fund for a while, but are now being more intentional about asking for planned gifts. Yay on you. You like the idea of having a planned gift section on the website and maybe some adult ed forums to bring people into the conversation. What would that look like at Christ Church, New Brunswick?
We've had a couple of forums starting the beginning of the year. We're starting to go to Zoom. Our big thing is we get gifts and a lot of them are anonymous and nobody would know anybody was giving planned gifts. So we've decided to say, well, let it be known you can give planned gifts and bequest and they help the church because I don't think it was intentional, but a lot of people gave and it was sort of the secret donation. Nobody knew where it came from. And so now we're telling people this is something you can celebrate, thinking about the church. We use a lot of the material that Mother Megan mentioned earlier about the scripture. We're starting to use that now, saying, what does God say and what does the church say about giving? So we're hoping that that'll open up the discussion a lot more than it has been in the past.
Thank you. And I see Christy McGuire talked about having a brochure, some written reference, some so that people can pick it up, presumably passively and privately. Let percolate a little bit, too many P's in a row, but you know what I mean. But also could be talking points as you do form a group and go out.
I'm just thinking about being prepared, like having a spur of the moment conversation with someone. It's a way to say, okay, here's a start. Let's talk again Tuesday, but here's the brochure and we can move from here. It's a starting point.
Thanks, Christy. And I see a comment here from Ken Maskell. Is Ken with us still? Is Ken still here?
Yep, he's here.
Okay. So Ken.
I couldn't get my mouse from the other screen to this screen to unmute myself. Sorry.
Thank you. So you like this idea that St. Stephen's Whiting is looking at, that the Bodines shared last week about end of life conference. funeral planning, liturgy planning, finances, medical stuff, communicating with your family. St. Augustine's Asbury Park did something like that and may revisit parts of it in the future. St. Stephen's Waretown is putting together their first one of these, coming up quick. And then that was a great point, but Ken wins the prize. First commitment of the night, committee to work on a gift acceptance policy. I thought it said commits to, but we'll have some samples for you. So thank you for that, Ken.
Okay.
Michael, my takeaway is that this is doable. Michael, good luck getting off this committee. You may hear from us. You may be recruited. This approach. Thank you. Kathleen says thank you. Michael, you have your 325th coming up, and that could be tied to a goal for an endowment. Megan, you talked about an elevator speech. What would that look like?
Well, an elevator speech means an enthusiastic but very short piece of conversation you can have with someone on the spur of a moment. If someone appears to be interested in including the congregation as part of their estate plan, you should be able to say a few sentences about why it's a great idea. Just a few sentences.
We hope that tonight is the start of moving you closer to being able to have that elevator speech, to make these initial contacts as this comes, whatever nudged you to be here tonight, coming to the clarity, and also the saints being equipped together as the church to find out what this means in our congregations and in our individual lives and ministries. We hope that we have given you some information, but we've also been blessed to share information. You saw that we had presenters and panelists, and even the suggestions about one next step. It's not just Project Resource teaching, but a community around this ministry, a community around responding to this call to help provide funds for ministry that come from a spiritual place into ministry in a practical and tangible way. We've got a minute or two before we wrap up. Is there something that is there anything that anybody wants to add or ask as we come towards our close?
I just want to say thank you to the panelists for being so open and so informative. Really wonderful to hear from you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do have a question. It's Ken Maskell.
Okay.
We have a rather unique thing going on. We have a trust from 1929 that now the bank, after fighting them for years and years to get our hands on the principal, now wants to give that up because it's 94 years later. And is there someone at the diocese that we can talk to about how to go about that? Because it's part of a huge trust from 1929 that went to places like Children's Hospital, Episcopal Hospital of Philadelphia, all sorts of things like that. So it's going to be complex.
I think I'm familiar with that trust. There may be a reported decision. There may be a legal decision on that particular trust. Give me a
I mean,
call.
I don't want to take your time up now.
But get in touch with me and I'll try to get you to the right people.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just curious, as far as the question is concerned, if the question is about that aspect or about alternatives for investment.
Well,
both.
that's another, that's another part of it. The bank, Wells Fargo contacted us this time and said, we don't want to be bothered with this anymore. But, there's going to be legal fees involved. So we wanted to talk with people outside Wells Fargo to understand that a little bit better.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So taking possession of that trust and not getting nicked too much along the way. But all these other questions about what to do with the money, gift acceptance policy are all
Right.
going to be out in front of you. So you get your work cut out for you.
Well, and
Which
the
is why I
reason-
said the gift acceptance committee would be
Yeah,
good to start with.
that's great.
One of the other, and just really briefly, because I know we're at just about at time, but when it comes to the point of actually transferring the assets of that trust, there are ways that you can do that that would incur large amounts of fees, but there are ways that we can help you with that may help minimize the amount of fees that you would pay in such a transfer. So let's be sure to all stay in touch with each other about this as you move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, we figured there's people out there that know a lot more than we do. So thank you.
And that's a perfect ending, that nobody is doing this alone. There can be uncertainty. There can be challenges of faith and inertia, but together as the church, with God's guidance and support from one another, all of this is doable for the good of the church in a way that's achievable for all of us because we go together. So thank you to everybody here tonight. Thank you to our panelists and presenters, Tina Aiken from St. David's Cranberry, Shirley Thompson from St. Augustine's Asbury Park, and Lou Price from Advent Cape May. Thank you to all of you. We hope this has been useful to you. We will send a package out to everybody who has registered. It'll be the slides. It'll be a summary of the chat, including some of the possible next steps, and some sample gift acceptance policies. Those of you who offered gift acceptance policies, project resource at dioceseofnj.org, or contact me or anybody you see here who you know. But we'd be very happy to receive those and share those.
And we'll
We
also
hope-
be sending links to the recordings
And links to yes.
for both of these. And I also did not want to neglect to thank Rebecca Karcher, who has been quietly in the background taking care of our slides for the presentation. So thank you, Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Happy to help as always. Thank you for a great workshop. I learned something myself tonight.
Great.
Can we close with a prayer? O God of unchangeable power and eternal light, look favorably on your whole church, that wonderful and sacred mystery. By the effectual working of your providence, carry out in tranquility the plan of salvation. Let the whole world see and know that things which were cast down are being raised up, and things which had grown old are being made new, and that all things are being brought to their perfection by him through whom all things were made, your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Thank you all, and look for an email package. It'll take us a few days, but you should have it by around this time next week, sooner if we can. Thank you.